Hello and welcome to MEELive. I'm Mathilda Mallinson. It's Tuesday, the 21st of April, 2026. Today on the US and Iran, can negotiations save the ceasefire? It's always hard to know what's happening in war, caught in the propaganda crossfire. But in the US-Iran war of words, the White House seems to be fighting itself. Whether it's logistics or negotiations, Trump's team can't seem to get their story straight. Is it a strategy of confusion or no strategy at all? This weekend, US news outlets were falling over themselves trying to work out who was going to Pakistan for peace talks. Several officials confirmed on Sunday Vice President J.D. Vance would be the one to go.
Who's leading the delegation to Islamabad tomorrow? Do we know?
The vice president's been leading the negotiations from the start.
But the very same day,
I just got off the phone with President Trump. Yet again, he told me that Vice President Vance will not be leading the U.S. delegation to Islamabad. He said it's because of security. The Secret Service did not feel comfortable having the vice president go to Pakistan on 24 hours' notice.
The next morning, the New York Post reported Trump was willing to meet Tehran himself. He also told them on the phone that Vance, Witkoff and Kushner were already on their way to Islamabad, due to land on Monday night. But roughly an hour and a half later, Vance's motorcade showed up at the White House. And it isn't just logistics the cabinet can't agree on. As round one of negotiations approached, Trump said almost all the points of past contention have been agreed to. He even claimed repeatedly Iran would let the US remove enriched uranium, which could be used to make a nuclear bomb. Trump calls this nuclear dust.
They've agreed to give us back the nuclear dust that's way underground because of the attack we made with the B-2 bomber. So we have a lot of agreement with Iran, and I think something's going to happen very positive.
But then, on April the 11th, the two sides left Islamabad with no deal. Iran's foreign minister said Tehran had never agreed to halt its nuclear program, nor did they have any plans to.
بحث ما قابل گفتگو هست. باز تأکید کردیم که جمهوری اسلامی ایران بر اساس نیازهاش باید بتواند.
So now we are 24 hours from the end of the ceasefire, and Trump said the second round of talks would already be underway. Instead, the situation appears even more chaotic. On Friday, Trump set the bar high, saying the Strait of Hormuz was open and negotiations should go very quickly, in that most of the points are already negotiated. He told Bloomberg Iran had even agreed to an unlimited suspension of its nuclear program, and posted online Iran has agreed to never close the Strait of Hormuz again. Problem solved. Yet by Saturday, Iran had blockaded the strait once more because the US was now blocking Iranian ports. Trump responded surprised. Iran recently announced that they were closing the strait, which is strange because our blockade has already closed it. He still said Iran agreed to most terms, but also threatened to destroy civilian infrastructure if they didn't agree to those same terms. After this, he told Fox News a deal would be signed by Monday night.
I just spoke with the president this morning for the third time in a week, and he told me he is expecting Iran to sign an agreement tomorrow night in Pakistan.
Come Monday afternoon, Trump's denying there's any time pressure for a deal and blamed the Democrats and the fake news media for conflicting accounts. He also contradicted his energy secretary about prospects for lower gas prices.
When do you think it's realistic for Americans to expect that gas will go back to under $3 a gallon?
I don't know. That could happen later this year. That might not happen until next year.
Trump told The Hill on Monday Wright was totally wrong and gas prices would come down as soon as this ends. Is the president confused, lying, or deliberately muddying the facts? Either way, it risks leaving the public, the markets, and perhaps the people he's negotiating with wondering, what is the White House's word worth? Here to bring some clarity into the situation is Iranian analyst Negar Mortazavi, senior fellow at the Center for International Policy. Negar, Trump has made very extreme threats against Iran and its civilian infrastructure. What happens if no deal is reached by tomorrow?
Mathilda, it's great to be back. It feels like forever indeed since the beginning of the war. Thanks for having me back. I would say, first of all, every threat that President Trump makes, can be seen both ways. Of course, he is the commander-in-chief of the most powerful army in the world, and he has made threats, and he's, made good on those threats in the past. So from especially the Iranian viewpoint, every threat he makes is taken very seriously and is seen as a potential step towards more escalation, which he has done many times throughout the course of this war. But then there's also the flip side of it. He uses this threat language as leverage for negotiations, and we've seen him do that before. The almost genocidal tweet that he threatened to end the Iranian civilization, and then it just turned out to be last-minute push for leverage for negotiations. So this is, again, another last-minute threat just before a round of ceasefire ends. We know that there's a lot of pressure in the U.S., for ending this unpopular war. There's very little support for this war in the US. Also around the world, there's global pressure because this has turned into a global crisis, at least economically. And it's just, I think that pressure is really transferring into the White House, and the president wants to exit the war. I actually believe that he wants to end the war. But the problem is that he wants to end it with a big win. And that I just don't think is something that's possible. He wants the Iranian side to surrender, to capitulate, to basically say, you win, we lose, which is not true. And it's also not something that's going to happen. We see Iranians willing to die and not surrender. And so I think as soon as that makes sense in the White House, that there may be no winner in this war, really, then it's easier for both sides to exit it.
That's definitely going to be a tough ask for the White House. From Iran's position, for now, they are still saying, as we record, that they're not going to commit to participating in further negotiations, just as the US is due to land in Islamabad tomorrow morning. Do you think that Tehran is bluffing? Do you think they will come to the negotiating table? What are they hoping to change as they maintain this stance and the deadline approaches?
Well, we've seen this also from Tehran's side in exactly the previous round of negotiations in Islamabad. Until the last minute, the Iranians were also putting their own last minute pressure to enforce the terms of the ceasefire, because US and Iran agreed on a ceasefire with mediation from Pakistan, and the region, or Lebanon, was agreed as part of that, as the Pakistanis later confirmed. And then Israel, as they have done in the past, just hours after the ceasefire started attacking Lebanon, and that massacre on Beirut and other locations, essentially to sabotage the ceasefire and the peace talks, the process towards a permanent end to the war. And so the Iranians were pushing until the last minute to see if they can enforce what they saw as the terms of the ceasefire. So this time around, I think we're seeing sort of them, in a way, also adopting President Trump's style, and seeing how much they can get until last minute. I wouldn't say it one way or the other. I don't want to rule out their participation, but at the same time, I think the red lines on the Iranian side are a little more firm than the US side. Iran doesn't have a lot of room to maneuver. I mean, what they want out of this ceasefire is a permanent end to the war. They want economic benefits as a result of this war, and they want the regional aspect. For the US side, I think the president has more room to maneuver, because at the end of the day, this war started with no real logic or reasoning, and so ending it can also just be as easy.
While there are these red lines Iran has that I'm sure all of the population is firmly on board on, a permanent peace plan, a lift to economic sanctions. Is there, I mean, I know that it's very hard, to understand how people in Iran are feeling due to internet blackout. Also, there's a whole range of emotions that different people, different parts of society will be feeling. But one of the other sticking points in the negotiations is the nuclear enrichment situation. And I wonder, is there any popular pressure for the government to budge on that point, however reluctantly? in the name of preventing further violence?
So, Mathilda, as you said, it's a country of 90 plus million people, and whoever speaks for all Iranians is just not telling you the truth because there is no one Iranian voice. We have to understand there are different pockets of the society. Now, for the case of, for the sake of simplifying, I would say there's maybe three main pockets. One is the pocket that's fully on board with the government, all of its policies. We see them on the street, we see them rallying, we see them grieving for the assassinated leaders, etc. That pocket has grown bigger, stronger, and they're really out in full force. And also they, essentially are putting their lives out when they're on the street protesting, when they go and stand on bridges to protect civilian infrastructure, etc. There's also another pocket, which I would say is much smaller on the opposite side, a radical pocket that potentially even before the war welcomed this war, thinking, I'm at my wit's end. I want the situation to end in any means possible. Now, that pocket inside the country at least has come to realization that, okay, this war wasn't what was promised. There's no surgical way of changing the regime or just going after the leaders in a targeted way. And I think it's become more and more clear that this is really a war on Iran and Iranians, on the country, on the civilization, on the infrastructure, on cultural heritage sites that are way, way, way older than the Islamic Republic, one government or the other. And also on the Iranian people. I mean, when from day one, elementary school, hospitals, universities, medical facilities, oil, gas, water, all kinds of civilian infrastructure has been attacked, it's the civilians that are paying the price for this war. So I would say that base has been shrinking, and some of them are actually coming out and saying we regret it because we didn't realize that this is going to look like this. Freedom bombs falling on people's homes and their kids' schools. And then there is a big, I would say, majority in the middle, sort of a silent majority, or I would say a gray area, people who may be on the fence one way or the other, who have a lot of grievances. They're not happy with the status quo. They have political, economic, social grievances. They are critics of a lot of the government's policies. But that doesn't mean that they would support an external force coming in, bombing schools, bombing hospitals, bombing homes, in the name of regime change, in the name of, nuclear, military, whatever you name it. I mean, the goals of this war are no longer clear. Reopening the Strait of Hormuz wasn't even a thing before this war started, and that has become the top goal. So they understand, and I would say we've seen a increase in nationalism, not necessarily rally around the government, but nationalism in that group saying, this is our home, this is our homeland, our sovereignty is being attacked, our independence, and no matter what the disagreement with the government and policies, this is not the way towards a better future, towards better governance, better policies. This is just making things worse. And so I would say there is now growing support for sort of that defense of the homeland. And if this war escalates to another level, more attacks, potentially any form of ground operation, we will just see even more and more of this nationalism growing, as we saw in the 1980s in the war between Iran and Iraq. We saw all people from all kinds of life, all political convictions, really signing up or being on board in the name of defending their land, defending their homeland, and defending their country, regardless of who is the leader and who's the government.
Thank you for taking us through that, Negar. And you're absolutely right. The war has had an incredibly heavy civilian toll, more than 3,600 deaths, at least 1,700 of those civilian deaths, 250 children. They have been killed by US-Israeli bombardments. Under the war, there have also been some clashes between civilians and security forces. It's 53 days into a near total internet shutdown. And the government has been executing some of the activists who participated in the January protests. I bring this up because when the war was first declared, for a lot of the international community, attention was on the January protesters. Can you tell us a bit about how that situation has evolved? Where are they now? Where has the war left them?
Absolutely. So just to simplify, there was a massive crackdown by the government, essentially, fighting off what they saw these little pockets, but unfolding a massacre of thousands of people on the street. With the admission of the government itself, over 3,000 total were killed. And this, the mindset also absolutely changes with the war starting, because when there is that existential security threat from the outside, what it leads to, and it has in the past, an absolute securitization inside the country, a closing of the political space. Any form of dissent or opposition is essentially going to be seen as existential or a fight against the entirety of the system. And so the crackdown becomes even more massive when you impose this war, this security threat from the outside. And so we're seeing the results of that. We're seeing the continuation of that crackdown, which happened during the protests, and then after the protests, of how the ones who were arrested are being treated as enemies, as spies, as armed clashes, etc. And I would say this is an absolute result of course, the war and that environment that the war created. It's something that we've seen in the past. During the 1980s war between Iran and Iraq, we've seen a similar pattern. And it's just going to be, it's one of the ramifications of this environment that leads essentially to the state become even more hardline when it comes to the domestic political space.
Now, turning back to the international situation, while it remains unclear whether these negotiations will continue, the first round in Islamabad was the first time that Washington and Tehran held face-to-face talks since 1979. How significant is this?
The first time at that high level, a US vice president and an Iranian speaker of parliament, who is now essentially the de facto leader of this war. It was unprecedented. It was historic. Pakistan's role has also been incredible. This, I would say, showed seriousness from both sides, and it unfolded very quickly. I mean, the vice president going from Washington halfway across the world to Iran's neighbor, and also the Iranians showing up and doing face-to-face. I think it showed, again, going back to the point about exiting the war, it shows that both sides have the intent and the seriousness to exit the war, but the gap between them is really wide. How they want to exit the war, each on their own terms, is just really different. First of all, President Trump, like I said, wants to declare victory. It's still not clear what victory looks for him because the goalpost keeps moving and changing. On the Iranian side, it's a little easier because for them, winning is just not losing. No regime change, no destroying the army, no destroying the navy, no change in a nuclear program. And now the Strait of Hormuz has essentially become their golden card, their main leverage that they're not giving up. And so for them, this was an existential war. This was a battle of survival, and they have been fighting it to defend the homeland, defend their sovereignty and their independence. And so maneuvering for them is going to be harder. And then at the same time, declaring a victory is easier because just not losing and staying has essentially been their card.
And there is, of course, one more factor in Iran's eyes, and that is Lebanon. Lebanon and Israel are due to meet in Washington on Thursday for another round of talks. This news comes as Israeli forces occupy a belt of Lebanon's southern territory. Residents have been blocked from returning homes. Soldiers are still ransacking their properties. What do you foresee for Lebanon? Will Iran accept an end to the war that leaves Lebanon behind?
I don't think so. I think this is one of those red lines that Iran is not going to give up, especially in this round. Because in this round, we saw for the first time Iran and Hezbollah really work in coordination. Essentially, Hezbollah entered this war with Iran. And for that reason, I don't think Iran is going to drop Lebanon or Hezbollah, basically. And we know that Israel and Lebanon have had ceasefires before throughout the past 3 years, and that ceasefire has been constantly violated. And so from Tehran's viewpoint, without that pressure from Tehran and without folding Hezbollah and Lebanon into this bigger ceasefire, the permanent end to the war, they don't think ceasefire in Lebanon can be permanent. And honestly, I mean, the Lebanese government may try their own route with Washington and with Israel, but I don't think without participation from Hezbollah on their side, this is going to be something that's permanent and sustainable. So from Tehran's viewpoint, their ally entered the war with them, worked in coordination, paid a very high price. And so they're not going to drop their, top ally in the region. And their thinking is that they went to this war together. They want to exit the war together. And if war comes back, they can potentially coordinate again, and this would make them stronger in the long term. So for that reason, we haven't seen that red line really shift from Tehran's viewpoint.
Negar and Mortazavi, it's been great to have you. Thank you for your time.